Hello everyone. What would you do if the charming stranger sitting across from you at dinner wasn't just anyone, but one of the most dangerous men in the city? This is the story of Elena Rivera, at 29. Elena had everything most people envied. She was a rising defense attorney, known for her sharp mind and relentless work ethic. She lived in the courtroom, thrived on late nights, and wore her ambition like armor. But behind the polished suits and the confident arguments, Elena was exhausted. Her career was flourishing, but her personal life was barren. She hadn't been on a real date in over 2 years. Her best friend, Marisa, never stopped reminding her of it. "You're turning into a hermit." Marisa had laughed one afternoon, practically forcing Elena to agree to a blind date. The arrangement felt awkward from the start. A friend of a friend's cousin, someone supposedly perfect for her. Elena resisted, but eventually gave in, promising herself it would be just one dinner. If it was terrible, she'd never have to do it again. That's how she found herself standing outside La Bella Notte, one of the city's most exclusive Italian restaurants. The converted mansion glowed in warm golden light, with soft music drifting out into the night air. Luxury cars lined the street, and couples strolled past dressed in their best. Elena smoothed the hem of her dress and took a deep breath. She wasn't used to this kind of scene. Her usual meals were takeout containers eaten over case files, not candlelight and violins. Inside, the maitre d' greeted her by name, almost as if she were expected. That small detail set her on edge. She followed him past tables where couples leaned close over wine glasses, whispering in soft tones. The air smelled of garlic, basil, and something rich she couldn't quite place. And then she saw him. Adrian Moretti rose to greet her from a secluded corner table. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair perfectly styled, and eyes the color of green glass, sharp enough to pin her in place. His suit was tailored, impeccable, the kind of fabric that whispered wealth without saying a word. When he smiled, it was devastating, a slow curve that seemed to melt the air around him. "Elena," he said, her name carrying the faintest Italian lilt. "You're even more beautiful than I imagined." Her pulse skipped. She told herself it was the atmosphere, the unexpected intensity of the moment. But even as he pulled out her chair with an easy old-fashioned grace, she felt something deeper. An awareness that this man carried power, the kind that could either protect or destroy. As the evening unfolded, Elena found herself disarmed by his charm. Adrian asked about her work, her goals, her family. He listened intently, laughed at the right moments, and seemed genuinely interested. And yet, beneath the smooth conversation, there were cracks she couldn't ignore. He dodged questions about his business, offering vague phrases like import and export. The waitstaff hovered around him with unusual deference, their eyes flickering nervously in his direction. Most unsettling of all were the two men seated apart from each other at different tables. They never spoke, never touched their meals, but every so often their eyes slid toward Adrian. To the untrained eye, they were just patrons, but Elena's years of observing body language in court told her otherwise. These men weren't here to dine. They were watching. She tried to push down the unease, telling herself she was overthinking, but her instincts, sharpened by years of defending men accused of terrible crimes, whispered something else entirely. Adrian leaned in, his cologne subtle but commanding. "I'm glad you came," he said softly. "Life is too short to spend all of it working." His words were warm, but Elena couldn't shake the prickle down her spine. She lifted her glass of wine, clinked it against his, and forced a smile. In that moment, she knew two things with absolute certainty. Adrian Moretti was unlike any man she had ever met, and she was stepping into something she might not be able to step out of again. And that was only the beginning. Elena told herself to relax. It was just dinner, just conversation. But sitting across from Adrian Moretti, she felt as though she had stepped onto a stage where every word mattered, every glance carried weight, and every silence was calculated. Adrian made it easy to forget her nerves. He asked questions no one had asked her in years. Not about her victories in court or her reputation as one of the city's toughest young defense attorneys. He asked about her dreams. "What do you see for yourself, Elena?" he asked, leaning forward slightly, his green eyes fixed on her. Not just the next trial, not the next case, 10 years from now, what is it you want most? The question startled her. Most men she met wanted to talk about themselves, eager to boast about their accomplishments or flaunt their connections. But Adrian wasn't like that. His interest was disarming, and his attention was unwavering. Elena hesitated before answering. Honestly, I've spent so long chasing one victory after another in the courtroom. I'm not even sure anymore. A family. Maybe. Balance. Something that feels like living instead of just surviving. Adrian's expression softened, and for a moment, the intensity in his gaze eased. Balance, he repeated. That is a rare thing in this world. Most people never find it. But you, I think you will. His words lingered, and Elena felt her cheeks warm. It wasn't just what he said, it was the way he said it, as if he wasn't flattering her, but recognizing something true inside her, something she didn't often admit to herself. They spoke easily, the conversation flowing like wine. He teased her gently about her workaholic habits, and she found herself laughing in a way she hadn't in months. Yet even in the warmth of his charm, shadows lingered. Whenever she asked about his work, his answers grew vague. Import and export, he would say with a shrug, the corners of his mouth tugging into that devastating half-smile. Family business. Very traditional. Very boring, but Elena knew better. She knew the signs of someone dodging questions. The skillful deflection of a man practiced in concealing truths. And it wasn't only his words, it was the way others behaved around him. The waitstaff treated him not just with respect but with something closer to fear. The maître d'œuvre nearby, discreet but attentive, as though Adrian were the most important guest in the room. Even the diners at nearby tables glanced at him with curiosity, sometimes admiration, sometimes unease. And then there were the two men, seated apart, their eyes occasionally drifting toward Adrian. Their presence gnawed at Elena. She told herself they might be bodyguards or business associates. But the reality was clear: they were watching him. And by extension, her. She tried to ignore the tightness in her chest, sipping her wine as Adrian shifted the conversation back to her life. His focus was intoxicating. When he said her name, Elena, it carried a weight that made her heart skip. When his hand brushed hers across the table, the contact sent a current racing up her arm. She was a woman trained to keep control. But around him, she felt that control slipping. Part of her wanted to pull back, to remind herself who she was and what kind of danger he represented. But another part, the part she kept hidden beneath layers of logic and responsibility, was drawn in helplessly, recklessly, completely. Adrian lifted his glass, his smile just a little softer now. To new beginnings, he said. She raised hers almost without thinking. Their glasses touched, and in that fragile clink, Elena felt the beginning of something she could neither explain nor stop. For a moment, she allowed herself to believe this was just a date, just a man, just a chance at something she hadn't dared to hope for in years. But reality has a way of intruding. As their entrees were being cleared, a shadow fell across the table. A tall man in a dark suit leaned down, his voice low and urgent, almost ignoring Elena's presence. "Scusi, Mr. Moretti," the man murmured. "There's a problem with the Russians. It needs your attention." The warmth between them shattered. Adrian's expression shifted in an instant. The easy charm vanished, replaced by something colder, sharper, commanding. "Not now," he said. His tone clipped. The man hesitated, then shook his head. "It cannot wait." Elena's heart thudded against her ribs. The words echoed in her mind, the Russians. She knew enough from her years in court to understand what that meant. Organized crime, territorial disputes, violence. Adrian turned to her, and for the first time that evening, regret clouded his eyes. "I'm sorry, Elena. There is something urgent I must attend to." He rose, his movements fluid, his authority unquestionable. He signaled to one of the ever-present men across the room, who immediately stepped forward, ready to escort her. Elena forced herself to nod, though her thoughts spun wildly. Relief, fear, and a strange, inexplicable disappointment tangled inside her. Adrian bent close, his hand brushing her back with that same electric touch she'd felt before. His voice was low, meant only for her. "I promise. This is not how I wanted the evening to end. He pressed a kiss to her hand. Old-fashioned and impossibly intimate. Then he was gone. Swept away by shadows and whispers, leaving her at the table with more questions than answers. As she stepped outside into the night, Elena couldn't decide what unsettled her more, the suspicion that Adrian Moretti was dangerous, or the realization that despite every warning sign, she already wanted to see him again, and deep down, she knew she would. The morning after the dinner that ended in whispers and shadows, Elena told herself to forget about Adrian Moretti. She had cases to prepare, clients to defend, a reputation to protect. Whatever world he belonged to, it was one she had no business stepping into. And then the flowers arrived. Her assistant carried them into her office, eyes wide at the extravagant arrangement. White roses, tall and elegant, their scent filling the room with a soft sweetness. Nestled among them was a card, written in careful script, "Until next time, A." Elena's pulse quickened. She should have thrown them in the trash. She should have laughed at the audacity. Instead, she found herself staring at the note for far too long, tracing the curve of his initial with her finger. Against her better judgment, curiosity outweighed caution. She sent him a message. That evening, she stood in front of a gleaming glass tower in the wealthiest part of the city. The doorman greeted her as though she were expected, escorting her to a private elevator that climbed silently to the very top. By the time the doors opened, Elena's heart was pounding so loudly she could barely hear. Adrian greeted her at the entrance of his penthouse. Not in a tailored suit this time, but in dark slacks and a crisp white shirt with the sleeves rolled up. He looked more relaxed, but no less commanding. The city stretched out behind him through floor-to-ceiling windows, the skyline glittering like 1,000 watchful eyes. "Welcome," he said, his voice carrying that smooth lilt she couldn't stop thinking about. "I hope you're hungry." The dining room was already set, candles glowing against the glass, the scent of roasted garlic and herbs drifting from the kitchen. Adrian moved with an ease that surprised her, pouring wine, serving plates with practiced hands. "You cooked?" she asked, trying to mask her unease with curiosity. He smiled, genuine and unguarded. "My grandmother taught me," she used to say. "A man who cannot cook cannot truly care for a woman." I've never forgotten that. Elena sat, torn between suspicion and something dangerously close to admiration. He was too perfect, too careful. And yet, in moments like this, he seemed startlingly human. For a while, they ate in near silence, the only sounds the clink of silverware and the faint hum of the city below. But Elena couldn't keep her questions locked away. Finally, she set down her fork and met his gaze. "Adrian," she said, steadying her voice, "what is it you actually do? Don't give me vague answers about imports and exports. I'm a defense attorney. I've heard every euphemism in the book." For a long moment, he was silent, the flicker of candlelight caught in his green eyes. And when he spoke again, his tone was more solemn than she had ever heard it. "You are direct. I respect that." He paused, then added, "But the truth is not simple." Elena's breath caught. She had prepared herself for evasions, not honesty. "My family has been in America for 3 generations," Adrian began. "My great-grandfather came from Sicily in the 1922nd. Work was scarce, opportunities even scarcer, so he built his own. Some of those choices were not entirely legal." Elena felt her stomach tighten. She had heard similar stories before, usually from men sitting across from her in orange jumpsuits, their voices heavy with regret or defiance. Over time, Adrian continued, the family business grew. Restaurants, construction, shipping. Many of our ventures are legitimate, but there are others, gray areas. You could say. Her chest tightened. She forced herself to ask. Gray areas like what? Adrian didn't flinch. Protection for businesses when the police look the other way. Resolving disputes when courts move too slowly. Loans for people who cannot get them through banks. Elena's voice sharpened. That's extortion. That's loan sharking. His gaze held hers, unwavering. That's survival. And order. Without us, chaos would reign in neighborhoods where no one else dares to protect the people. She wanted to argue, to lay out every principle she had sworn to uphold. But in his words, there was conviction dangerous. Yes. but sincere. Are you telling me, she whispered, that you're part of the Moretti crime family? The silence between them was answer enough. Finally, Adrian spoke. That word crime family carries assumptions. But yes, I was born into it. It is not a life I chose. But it is a responsibility I cannot simply abandon. Elena's pulse raced. She had suspected, she had seen the signs. But hearing him say it aloud was something else entirely. She should have stood up, walked out, ended this before it could unravel her carefully constructed world. But she didn't move, because even as her mind screamed danger, her heart betrayed her. Beneath the power and the shadows, Adrian was looking at her with something rare vulnerability. His voice lowered, almost unsteady. I tell you this because you asked, and because lying to you would be worse than any judgment you pass on me. Last night, I felt not as the man they fear, not as the boss, just as a man. That is something I haven't felt in years. Elena sat frozen, her glass untouched. Her entire life had been built on the belief that the law was the line between order and chaos, that truth mattered, that justice mattered. And now, across from her, sat a man who lived outside of all of it, and yet treated her with a gentleness no one else ever had. Her principles screamed at her to leave, but her heart pounded with something she didn't want to name. It was attraction. It was danger. It was everything she should avoid, and she knew, with a clarity that terrified her, that this was only the beginning of her dilemma. Elena told herself she would keep her distance. She had heard the truth, and the truth was more than enough. Adrian Moretti was a man whose life was entangled with crime, power, and shadows. She should have walked away after that dinner in his penthouse. She should have buried the memory of his voice, his gaze, his confession. But the world had other plans. 3 days later, as Elena was preparing for court, her phone rang. The voice on the other end was firm. Official, Miss Rivera. This is Detective Ryan from the Organized Crime Unit. We'd like you to come down to the station. It's about Adrian Moretti. Her blood turned cold. She had defended clients accused of terrible things. But this was different. This time, she wasn't their lawyer. She was their associate. At the precinct, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Detective Ryan slid a photograph across the table. The charred remains of a nightclub smoldered in the picture, smoke still curling above blackened walls. The Blue Orchid, the detective explained, belonged to the Petro Syndicate, burned down last night. 3 men hospitalized. Witnesses say Moretti's people were seen in the area. Elena forced her expression into neutrality. And what does that have to do with me? You've been seen with him, Ryan said flatly. Dinner, flowers, private meetings. You're a smart woman. Miss Rivera, I'm asking you, what do you know about Adrian Moretti's involvement? Every instinct in her screamed to protect herself, to distance herself from this man who was pulling her into danger. But another voice whispered louder, the one that remembered his honesty, his vulnerability, his touch. I know he hasn't been charged, Elena said calmly, and I know that until he is, you have nothing. The detective narrowed his eyes but said nothing. After 30 minutes of carefully chosen answers, Elena was released. She walked out of the station with her pulse pounding, fear and defiance warring inside her. But that was only the beginning of her trials. The next day, a woman appeared at her office unannounced. She was tall, elegant, with auburn hair that gleamed under the light and eyes as sharp as polished steel. She carried herself with the confidence of someone who always gets what she wants. Elena Rivera, she said smoothly. I'm Isabella Romano. The name alone made Elena's stomach clench. I've heard you've been spending time with Adrian, Isabella continued, crossing her legs with deliberate grace. I thought you should know he always comes back to me. Her words landed like a knife. Elena tried to keep her voice steady. If you think intimidation works on me, you're mistaken. Isabella smiled. But it wasn't kind. I'm not here to intimidate. I'm here to warn you. Adrian is powerful, magnetic, intoxicating. I know that better than anyone. But he belongs to a world you can't handle. I grew up in it. I know its rules. You, Elena, do not. Elena held her gaze, refusing to flinch. If you're so secure in your place, why are you here? For the first time, Isabella's expression tightened, just slightly. Because women like you are distractions. Brief. Fleeting. But they don't last. Adrian will always return to what he knows. She rose gracefully, smoothing her designer skirt. Save yourself the heartbreak. Darling. Walk away before you're destroyed by a man who was never yours to keep. The moment Isabella left, Elena's composure cracked. Doubt tore through her. Was she nothing more than an interlude in Adrian's dangerous life? A diversion before he returned to the woman who claimed him so confidently. That evening, Elena confronted Adrian. She found him in his office. Papers scattered across a desk. The weight of responsibility etched in the lines of his face. Tell me the truth, she demanded, her voice trembling with anger and fear. Who is Isabella to you? Adrian's head snapped up, surprise flashing across his features. Then he sighed, running a hand through his hair. So she came to you. She said you always come back to her, that you belong to her. Is it true? He stood, crossing the room with deliberate calm until he was only a breath away. His eyes locked onto hers, steady and unflinching. Isabella was part of my past, he said firmly. For years, our families assumed we would end up together. It was convenient, expected, but it was never love. She knows the power, the influence. She never saw me, Elena, not as a man, only as what I represent. Elena wanted to believe him, but the doubts still clung. And me, what am I to you? Adrian, another distraction, another woman you'll eventually leave behind. For the first time, his composure cracked. His voice grew raw, almost desperate. No, he said, his hand brushing against hers, his touch burning with urgency. You are the first woman who has ever made me want more than this life. The first who has ever made me feel like I could be better. Elena, he drew in a breath, as though the words themselves carried weight he had never dared before. I love you. The room seemed to fall silent. Elena's chest tightened, her mind spinning. She had spent years listening to men say anything to save themselves, anything to get what they wanted. But Adrian's voice was different, unpolished, unpracticed, terrifyingly real. He had never said those words to anyone. And now, they hung between them like a promise and a curse all at once. Elena's heart raced. Logic screamed at her to turn away, to remember the burned nightclub, the detectives, the rival who warned her. But her heart, the heart that had been starved of connection for so long, whispered something else entirely. For the first time, she wondered if she was already in too deep to walk away, and she feared the answer. Elena stood in silence, her pulse still echoing with the words Adrian had spoken. I love you. The 3 words she had longed to hear from someone who truly meant them, and yet never expected from a man like him. But love, she knew, was never enough by itself, not when it came shackled to danger, shadowed by crime, and tainted by secrets that could destroy her career and her life. Adrian must have seen the conflict flickering in her eyes, because he stepped back, his voice low but steady. I won't lie to you, Elena. My world is dangerous. It demands loyalty, and it punishes weakness. Being with me would mean carrying that weight, and I cannot ask you to bear it without giving you a choice. He drew in a breath, as if summoning the courage to expose his vulnerability once more. So here it is. You can walk away now. Tonight, I'll make sure you're protected, that your name is never tied to mine. You'll be free to go back to your safe, law-abiding life. His eyes burned with something fierce, something unyielding. Or, you can stay with me, knowing exactly what I am, knowing the risks, the enemies, the nights where danger may come to our door. If you choose me, I'll give you everything I have, my loyalty, my protection, my devotion. You'll never have to doubt me again. The words hung between them like a knife edge, sharp enough to cut either way. Elena's throat tightened. Walk away and reclaim the certainty of her life, the order of law and justice. Stay and surrender to the chaos. The temptation of a man who could make her heart race with a single glance. Her mind raced through images: the burned nightclub, the detective's suspicion, Isabella's warning smile, then others, Adrian's hand brushing hers, his laughter when she teased him, the honesty in his confession at the penthouse table. For so long, she had defined herself by control, by principles carved into stone. She had believed justice was her compass, law, her shield. But staring at Adrian, she felt something shift. She was no longer just a lawyer. She was a woman who longed for connection, for passion, for a love that might cost her everything but give her more than she had ever known. Tears welled in her eyes as she whispered, "You've left me with an impossible choice." Adrian reached for her hand, his touch firm but tender. "No, Elena, it is the only honest choice I can give you. Whatever you decide, I'll honor it." Her lips trembled as she drew closer, her voice barely above a breath. "I love you." Too. Adrian's eyes widened, the words striking him like a force he hadn't expected. "But," she continued, her tone sharpening with resolve, "we do this on my terms. No lies, no half-truths. If I'm going to stand by your side, I need to know everything, and I need to see a future that isn't buried in shadows. If we're going to be together, it has to be a future beyond crime." Adrian searched her face, as though testing her conviction. Then, slowly, he nodded. "For you, I will consider anything," he said quietly. "I cannot abandon the responsibilities I inherited overnight, but I will explore another path: legitimate businesses, investments, enterprises that can stand in the light. If it is what you need, then I will try." Elena's breath caught. She hadn't expected him to agree. Not so quickly. Not with such sincerity. "You'd do that?" she asked, her voice soft. "For you?" "Yes. Because you see the man I could be, not just the man I am, and I want to be worthy of that vision." The tension in the room softened, replaced by something fragile and profound. The weight of danger remained, the reality of his life unchanged. But in that moment, Elena felt the impossible tilt in her favor. She had not only confessed her love, she had demanded something better from it. Adrian drew her into his arms, his voice breaking with emotion. "Then let this be the beginning, Elena. Not of lies and shadows, but of something real, something we both can live with." She closed her eyes, resting her forehead against his chest, and whispered, "Then I'll stay. But only if we fight for that future together." His arms tightened around her, and for the first time since she met him, Elena felt as though she wasn't stepping into his world, he was stepping into hers. It was dangerous. It was reckless. And it was unlike anything she had ever imagined. But it was also hers, and as their hearts beat in unison, Elena realized the choice had never been about law versus crime, safety versus danger. It was about love, messy, complicated, forbidden love that demanded courage from them both. In that moment, she chose not the life she had always known, but the one her heart could no longer deny. The weeks that followed were not easy. Loving Adrian Moretti meant stepping into a world that had always terrified Elena. A world she had once sworn to fight against. But slowly, almost against her own expectations, she began to navigate it. At first, his family eyed her with suspicion. To them, she was an outsider, a lawyer, a woman from a different world who could never truly understand their ways. But Elena didn't flinch. She listened, observed, and spoke with the same calm authority that made her formidable in court. Over time, the skepticism shifted. They began to respect her not just as Adrian's companion, but as someone strong enough to stand beside him. Adrian kept his promise. Bit by bit, he started redirecting his influence into legitimate ventures. A chain of Italian restaurants that carried his grandmother's recipes, real estate developments that breathed new life into neglected neighborhoods, import businesses that dealt in wines, textiles, and luxury goods, entirely above board. It was not a clean break. He still carried obligations to the family empire, but it was a step into the light. And Elena saw the effort written in every choice he made. Yet challenges remained. Rivals still circled, questioning Adrian's shift, testing his resolve. Investigators whispered his name. Waiting for a misstep, Isabella lingered on the edges, her presence a reminder of the life he had left behind. And there were nights when Elena doubted when the weight of what he was, and what he had been, pressed down on her like a shadow. But each trial only seemed to bind them closer. Adrian had never been a man to bare his soul. But with Elena, he began to. She became his confidant, the one he trusted with his secrets, his fears, his dreams, and he, in turn, gave her something she had not felt in years: the freedom to be more than just a lawyer chained to principles. With him, she was allowed to be a woman desiring, choosing, shaping her own destiny. One evening, as they stood together overlooking the city from his penthouse windows, Elena realized something had changed. She had not abandoned her principles, as she once feared. She had reshaped them. She still believed in justice, still believed in truth. But she had learned that the world was more complicated than she had once allowed. Law and love did not always walk the same path, but perhaps, if she was strong enough, she could hold them both. Adrian's hand found hers, strong and steady, and she knew she had chosen not only him, but a life that demanded courage every single day. And for the first time, she felt ready for it. 6 months after their first encounter, Adrian invited Elena back to the place where it all began, La Bella Notte. The restaurant was quiet that evening, the entire space reserved just for them. Candlelight flickered on the same corner table where she had once walked in, uncertain, guarded, unaware that her life was about to change. This time, there were no watchful men at nearby tables, no shadows lurking in the background, only Adrian, standing before her with a ring in his hand, his voice steady but carrying an emotion she had rarely heard from him. "Elena," he said softly, "that night, you saw through everything, through the charm, the reputation, the power. You saw me, and for that, I will spend the rest of my life proving I am worthy of you. Will you marry me?" Tears welled in her eyes as she whispered the only answer her heart had ever truly known. Yes, to all of it, to the risks, the fire, the impossible love that became ours. In that moment, their story came full circle. A date that began with suspicion ended with a vow, binding them not in perfection, but in defiance, choosing love in a world that tried to deny it. Because love doesn't always follow the rules. Sometimes it dares us to cross the lines we swore we never would. Elena thought she was meeting a stranger for dinner. Instead, she found a man who was both her greatest danger and her greatest home. If this story touched you, tell us in the comments. Would you have walked away? Or risked it all for love? Don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who loves romance with a twist, and subscribe for more unforgettable stories.